Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, May the 30th, 2026, the last day or the last Saturday in May. Of course, it's time for That Was the Week, our weekly summary of big tech news. We haven't done it for 10 days. Last time with Keith Tier, we asked whether capitalism has a future in the AI age. That was back on May 20th, so we haven't done a show for 10 days. Before we went live, Keith said to me that it wasn't a big news week this week, but I wonder whether he was conveniently ignoring the big news. The big news, of course, of the week is that Anthropic, not his team is OpenAI, has become the world's most valuable AI startup. It raised $65 billion this week, putting its value at $900 billion, almost at $1 trillion, way ahead of OpenAI's last valuation of $730 billion. But as it happens, on Keith's notes this week, he talks about something called Agentcy, which we'll come to. There's no mention of this news. So, Keith, have you conveniently ignored the big news of the week, or do you not consider it significant? Will you tell me that it doesn't really matter?
Well, you heard it here first, but it's both true and BS at the same time. It's true that they did a funding round at that valuation, and OpenAI is just slightly behind on funding rounds. That's true.
Slightly behind. What's $150 billion between friends, Q?
Yeah, but it's going to be 2 weeks before it changes again. So it is what it is. It looks to me.
I'll quote you on that. 2 weeks. So you're saying that by mid-June, OpenAI will have overtaken Anthropic again?
Well, OpenAI is pretty far ahead on IPO filing, and we're just behind SpaceX. So I'd strongly expect OpenAI to get through the gate first. Now that is going to shine a light, because both Anthropic and OpenAI are going to have to write S1s. That's the document you write for the SEC that investors get to read. And the S1 has to have audited accounts in it. The most recent ones can be unaudited, but it has to be, accountancy, rubber stamped accounts. And the talk of the town is that Anthropic's revenues are basically lies.
What do you mean the talk? I mean, who is exactly saying that they're lies? That you mean they're just misleading people? What do you mean talk of the town?
They're misleading people. Om Malik, go to Om's website, anyone listening, and look at his most recent post, which it's going to be in next week's newsletter because it only came out.
This week you have a piece from Om on the copy and the guru. So Om says that Anthropic is fraudulent.
Yeah, and then go and listen to yesterday's All In podcast discussion about this. It is pretty well received that Anthropic's S1 will not have the revenue numbers that have been leaked because they're not real. Now, that doesn't mean the numbers are fake. It means they're counting things in revenue that they're really not allowed to count. And that is, and the second sub theme there is that Dario Amadei is deceitful and devious.
Yeah, you don't like Dario. We've had that many times.
But it's not whether you like him.
Hold on. But
it's not about whether you like him. It's whether it's just factual.
Can't we just have some love for OpenAI? Can't we credit them that they've done rather well? I mean, they're getting backing from Green Oaks, Sequoia, Altimeter, Dragoneer, the top VC firms. So presumably they've looked at their books. They're not going to pour billions of dollars in without actually knowing exactly what they're investing in.
You're not wrong. That's a slightly different question than the one you asked, which is the competition with OpenAI. If you just asked me about Anthropic, they released Opus 4.8 2 days ago. Honestly, they're fantastic. Their stuff is fantastic. I just to give you a personal anecdote, at Signal Rank, we are moving to a regime where we have to have a third party value all of the holdings that we have in the index. So we can't do it ourselves anymore. And yesterday, that third party delivered to us their first assessment of the value of each of our assets. And I had an agent that was creating a valuation report monthly for our internal valuation committee, and it had to completely change its rules and produce the report using this new third-party stuff, including making databases, analyzing, and then blending. And in about an hour, Claude had completely changed the entire agent flow and produced an outstanding report that would have taken me days to produce. So it's definitely fantastic. So that's not really an issue. And I think Dario, by the way, as a technical leader of a team, is also fantastic. I've always characterized him as slightly juvenile, making mistakes. I do think that's also true, but it doesn't take away from the other stuff.
Right. I mean, it comes to slipperiness or being juvenile. I'm not quite sure how he compares with either Sam Altman or Elon Musk. That's another question.
Well, Altman's grown up. I mean, he really has. If you could use some dated stuff, but if you look at his actual statements, the last, I'd say 2 months, very different tone. Like this week, Altman talked a lot about UBI and jobs. And whereas Amadai is still fear-mongering about the devastation that's going to be wreaked by AI, Altman is saying UBI is not going to be good enough. What we need is ownership. So humans have to get ownership in the AI platforms in order that the wealth growth benefits them. And he's changed the narrative from UBI to ownership. And, you know, that's an interesting conversation. So I don't like the fanboy stuff, and you're right to characterize me as tending more towards Altman than Dario on the edge. That I've characterized both of them as not good leaders, and I think that.
But you have to admit, Keith. I mean, I know it's easy for me to say this, and hindsight's always 20/20. That a year or two ago, you always used to say on this show, oh, no one can catch OpenAI. They're going to be a 5, 10, $15 trillion company. They've already won. They've sewn up the revenue. Everyone's using them. They're the new Kleenex or Google or whatever AI brand. And that's wrong. I mean, Anthropic have overtaken them.
Well, you're using
the point on, you know, Dario is certainly not the Pope. We'll come to the Pope later. But they've overtaken them, and their valuation has doubled in the last 6 months, whereas OpenAI seems a little stalled, to say the best.
It's more than doubled based on leaked revenue numbers, and I'm predicting on this show that will come back to bite them. And but it's interesting, Andrew, because you're not one to normally take what VCs do as gospel. In this case, you're swallowing whole what the VCs are doing.
Well, are you saying that the VCs have been? Are you saying the VCs have been tricked by these numbers? I mean, they must be seeing what they're.
Look, the VCs are
in the media.
No, the VCs are acting rationally, but they're playing a different game. The game the VCs are playing is that they'll make 2, maybe 3 times their money by investing these large sums this late prior to an IPO, and they probably will. But you know. Yesterday, there was a guy, he said he was offered $10 million worth of Anthropic stock at $1 trillion valuation. This was Ohm, by the way.
Ohm was offered $10 million?
No, it was a friend of his. And they turned it down because when they look at the numbers, there's no justification. Now, that's true, but it's also true that if you invested $1 trillion, you'll probably make 2 to 3 times your money at an IPO. That's also true. And that's because we're at the stage of everything where, you know, the only way is up.
So, but looking back, Keith,
normally you'd be.
I take your point, and we will see in the future. I'm not going to call you on it, but we will do many shows on this subject. We have done many, and we will do many in the future. But looking back, and this isn't so much of a critical question, what did you get wrong? What did you misunderstand about the fact that, because you were convinced that OpenAI had sewn it up, that there wasn't going to be any.
So I'll answer a question with a question. Why do you think I'm wrong? In my view of the world, OpenAI is executing better. Codex is unbelievable in terms of what it can do. It massively dominates consumer use.
Yeah, but not corporate.
Worldwide. It is now catching up in corporate. It wasn't really playing in corporate. It's now catching up, and fast, I think. They just hired the head of sales from an enterprise company. I forget which one it was. They're doubling down on corporate.
So in other words, okay, so I take your point. So in other words, you're not wrong. In other words, OpenAI.
I don't think I'm wrong. I think OpenAI is building. They're both going to be very valuable. Let's be honest. But OpenAI isn't losing here. Is
it still going to be worth $10 or $15 trillion in a few years? Do you think?
I said 10. I stick to that. But I think Anthropic can be worth 5.
Oh.
And so
that friend of home, if you're listening, invest at the $1 trillion level. You mentioned that neither Sam Altman or Dario Amodei are the Pope, and of course, there's only one Pope. And apparently, I know this was slightly older news, but we haven't done a show for 10 days. The Pope now, of all people, is disrupting Silicon Valley, and interestingly enough, he's doing it not with OpenAI executives, but with one of the co-founders of Anthropic, Christopher Olah. I've never heard of him. We always joke on this show about how many co-founders. They seem to come out of the woodwork every time. So what do you make of this, Keith? I know it's slightly older news, and it may have come in your newsletter the week before, but you included John Thornhill's excellent FT piece on Pope disrupting Silicon Valley. Is this a big deal?
Well, you can learn from everything. So what do we learn from this? Firstly, we learned that Anthropic sent one of its founders to ask the Pope's help in protecting the world from AI. Well, what is that all about?
No, he didn't. I mean, he went there to talk about how wealth can be redistributed. I'm not sure he's talking about protection.
No, he did. The FT is only picking up on one side of it. And the Pope, to give him some credit, emphasized the importance of AI, whilst also, not liking its military uses, which of course is an Anthropic mantra. And so what this really is it's a doubling down by Anthropic on trying to create a space, a moral space, where it is the benign and concerned. I'd say benign and concerned are the two elements there. Seeking from all people the Pope to come onto their team, whereas OpenAI is benign and unconcerned, and argues that they're in control, that the AI.
Maybe the OpenAI should send their co-founder to the chief rabbi or the head of the Rome or the head of another church, or maybe even to the head of the Islamic faith. But I think you're being a little unkind. I mean, you're like one of these parents who, for some reason or another, the child cannot satisfy them. Anything they do, you're critical of. You don't give OpenAI any credit for trying to work with the Pope.
Anthropic, you mean?
Anthropic, to address this. I mean, there was an interesting piece. I know you didn't include it in the newsletter, from Noma. It's a very good online magazine.
Yeah, it is.
About what they call the universal destination of goods. They've been calling for a year or two about policies that should induce as many as possible of the people to become owners of capital. You and I have talked about that. I know you're sympathetic to that, and that's something else that the Pope addresses in this Magnificat.
Well, actually, the only one of the two embracing that is Altman. That was exactly Altman's point this week. So,
well, maybe he should have sent someone to the Vatican, or maybe he should have shown up himself.
Well, do you really think the Vatican matters? I don't.
Well, it got a lot of press. Are you suggesting it's irrelevant? It's not really news?
It's a pre-medieval institution that believes that there's a super being, and that super being talks to this guy.
Well, except that it has a lot of political power and significance, that it's made significant news. And the fact, I mean, I agree with you in some ways, but on the other hand, the fact that the Pope of all people is getting involved in conversations about Silicon Valley, that the Pope, in Thornhill's words, is disrupting Silicon Valley, speaks of how this technology now, for better or worse, is so central to everything.
Well, what really happened this week is the opposite, is that Trump blocked an AI bill that came from Congress on the grounds that he doesn't believe government stepping in to have a role in AI as an arbiter of what can be released makes any sense and will slow down America's development. And so, you know, the real news of the week is the opposite of what Anthropic was asking for has happened, which is AI still got independent authority to determine its own future.
Yeah, no, Anthropic hasn't done badly out of that. So we will see. This is an ongoing conversation, but Keith Teare clearly does not like, I'm not sure if it's Anthropic or it's just Dario you don't seem to like, but we will come back to that.
Again, it's not about whether I like him, it's whether it's my assessment of him.
Yeah, you don't think much of him.
I think he's making some mistakes.
Well, Dario, if you're watching, even if you're almost at $1 trillion, Keith Teare says you're making some mistakes. Maybe, will you give him some lessons, Keith? Private consulting, tell him how to run a company properly.
I do a lot of that with founders, but he's not going to come and ask, is he? So
would you do it for free? Maybe for some Anthropic stock?
No, I do it for free. I enjoy it.
There you are, Dario. Keith Teare will give you some free advice on how to run your company. Let's move on to your editorial this week about something called human agency, but it's, for people listening, can't see the screen, it's spelled Agentcy. It's not a typo. What does this word agency, Keith, mean for you?
It's derived from a bunch of the articles that are in this week's newsletter that are talking about this step change in the use of AI. Thomas Tungers is one of the people writing about it, but there's several. Reid Hoffman talks about it, and Malik responds to Reid.
Yeah,
Hoffman.
and the Tungers piece, skill distillation, I found very interesting. The Malik piece is called The Copy and the Guru, and Reid Hoffman features in a Wall Street Journal piece about digital twins. So it's an important issue this week. So what are they all arguing or agreeing or disagreeing on?
They're disagreeing. Reid Hoffman, I think, is a little bit dated in describing AI as a digital twin, and he's created a digital Reid Hoffman, and I can't remember how you can go and use it, but you can go and ask him questions, and it sits on top of all of his body of work.
He's a busy guy, Reid. He doesn't have time for you and I, so he's. But he sometimes responds to my email. He's actually a very nice fellow.
He's a very nice fellow. I agree with you. Ohm reacts to that and saying, look, the purpose of AI isn't to be your digital twin. It's not to make many copies of you. It's actually to allow you to carry out tasks that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do because it would involve too much time and effort. And so you can multiply your outputs using AI, and that is agency.
So where's the so explain why is the C? Oh, it's AGENT and then AGENCY, agency. So you're combining the two.
I'm combining the two, and I'm what I'm making the point.
Did you use OpenAI for that, Keith, or do you think of it yourself?
I thought of it myself. AI actually had a very boring view of what the title should be this week, and I said in one word, agency, and it said, oh, that's so much better than what I suggested.
I'm going to ask Anthropic. I mean, after we finish this, I'm going to ask Anthropic if they think it's a bit cheesy. Anthropic wouldn't let, Claude would tell me that was a bit cheesy, but maybe they're a bit higher end than OpenAI.
But you're right to ask. Originally, I didn't have the word human before it. I just said agency. And I decided it's a bit too subtle, so I put the word human. So
it's very subtle, agency.
It now says human agency. And the point it's making is that these agents are extending your ability to get stuff done. They're not autonomous and they're not independent. They're really your assistants, if you will, or better than assistants, because they actually do stuff. The example I gave earlier about the valuation exercise at SignalRank is a great example of it. And suddenly, if you look at your week's work, what do you have to get done? If you understand how to use agents, and by the way, you don't have to install anything anymore. Agents are now built into both Claude code and Codex, the OpenAI equivalent. So you can tell them create agents for each subtask here, and it will do it for you, and the task will get done much more efficiently.
So I said to you before we went live, I couldn't agree more with the own position or your position, but isn't it kind of obvious? And you said, no, a lot of people aren't using AI in that way. They're using it in a kind of, or they're seeking digital twins. How are most people using Claude or OpenAI?
Well, it's interesting, Andrew. If you look at the user interface for the Claude app on a Mac, there's 3 tabs. The first tab is chat. The second tab is co-work. And the third tab is code. And chat is heavily dominant in use. People are just chatting, looking for answers to questions, which of course is a good use case for AI. And it's better since it became less hallucinistic. Co-work, it's where it gets access to your browser and your, let's say, your word processor or your PowerPoint or your Excel or other tools, and can carry out work using all the tools on your computer. That's pretty powerful. Not many people are yet doing that. I mean, obviously quite a few are, but it's not the dominant use. And the third one, which is code, is what developers are using it for. And some non-developers who are learning to code for the first time, well, not learning to code, learning how to produce code using AI. So I think the middle one, co-work, actually ends up being super important, but is the least used of the 3.
Yeah, you refer to the Tungus piece. He's one of your favorite writers, highly sophisticated guy in Silicon Valley, and he has a piece called Skill Distillation, and I'm quoting the intro. He said, "I've been using state-of-the-art models to teach small models running on my computer how I work. My personal agent based on Pi runs my inbox, my deal pipeline, my blog publishing, my calendar, and my research. It looks like a chatbot.
It looks less like
it looks less like a chatbot and more like a small operating system." So what I found interesting about this is he's clearly a highly sophisticated user, investor. He knows his tech, but this is the future ultimately, Keith, for all of us, isn't it?
I think so. Basically, you get surrounded by, a paraphernalia of stuff that makes you super efficient at getting stuff done. And he calls it
some of us, at least. I mean, the Tunguses of the world, maybe the Keith Tiers, but not everyone. But certainly people who know how to use it.
Yeah, not everyone. I mean, my team at Signal Rank, I say, is pretty typical, and they all buy into AI. They all use.
Well, I'm sure if they didn't, you'd fire them.
Probably not, but they all use AI. But they look at my use slightly weirdly, I'd say. But the results are getting better and better and better. And so there used to be a lot of pushback on my use, and now there isn't, because the outputs justify doing it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a process. And
so where will we be? I mean, Tungus, I mean, I said to you before we went live, it seems to me we're still in almost the pre-web browser moment in AI. Where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years? There's going to be software, hardware, interfaces that will just make this seamless, Keith, won't it?
I think seamless, but to the point of this week's headline, I think it will become
on Agency, spelled with a C and a Y and a T.
I think it'll become very obvious that what we're witnessing is human evolution, not AI evolution. That AI is not a separate, autonomous, scary or dangerous thing. It's elevating humans to a new capability level. And therefore, this whole narrative, as if AI is something other, won't be able to survive, because as people use it, it becomes clear that it's your thing, not a thing.
Yeah, although the Tunguses, as I said, of the world are going to be so far ahead. In 5 or 10 years, they'll be onto something else. We will see. It certainly speaks of the concentration of power. I mean, the Tunguses of the world are already powerful and wealthy. They're going to become even more powerful and wealthy. Your wife, Jeanette here, talks about the concentration of venture capital this week. No surprise. What's happening on that front? What does Jeanette tell us, Keith?
Well, she's reporting the news, and the news is that a vast proportion of all the dollars being invested is coming, and this is true at every stage of investing, from less and less funds into less and less companies. And that therefore venture capital is not what it used to be. If you are a startup or a founder trying to attract capital at the seed stage, unless you fall into the Sequoia Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, General Catalyst, Lightspeed Ventures.
Yeah, the people who just put all those billions of dollars into Anthropic this week.
Yeah, unless you tick their boxes, it's going to be a struggle for you to raise capital. Now, last week when you were away, I wrote the editorial about venture capital, and I made the point that paradoxically, this may be a good thing.
For who? Venture capitalists or entrepreneurs?
Actually, for pensioners. What's big picture? Venture capital has not been returning money to the source, which is pension funds. Since 2021, investments are being lost, large amounts of money being lost, and funds underperforming. And so there was a liquidity crisis in venture capital. And paradoxically, the rise of AI and the concentration is the saving grace, because if you can invest hundreds of billions of dollars and in a very short space of time, because of IPOs, return 2 to 3 times your investment, that money will flow back to pension funds and ultimately will provide capital for the early stage funds as well as everyone else. And so what we might be witnessing here is a fix, not something broken, but actually a fix for the entire venture ecosystem. For that to be true, these IPOs have to happen, be liquid, and money has to be returned to the pension funds that originally gave it. That seems quite likely to happen.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the IPO is supposedly later this year of Musk's conglomeration, SpaceX, whatever he calls it these days, OpenAI, and then Anthropic will be very interesting. But I think also Jeanette's point, and this has been happening for a while now, this concentration of power and wealth, of course, venture capital, but it's everywhere, which also explains why the Pope has become involved in these conversations about figuring out, and I know you've often talked about this, about we've got to figure out ways of redistributing both power and wealth. So the fact that the Pope is involving himself in this conversation, even if it's with the help of Anthropic, is presumably a good thing, Keith, isn't it?
It's a good thing if it translates into a real conversation about the future of society in a leisure-heavy world. That transformation hasn't happened yet.
It's going to take a while. I mean, there is some skepticism. The Guardian wonders whether this Anthropic alliance, and they're a little skeptical like you, the alliance with the Pope on AI is a form of Vatican washing, which is an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, two things can be true at the same time. I think probably there's truth in that. It feels as if Anthropic is highly strategic in what it chooses to do based on its internal needs. Neither Anthropic nor OpenAI can yet be trusted with a societal level narrative.
So who do we trust then? And there was a piece in The Verge which you connected to an interesting interview with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Can we trust the grown-ups? I mean, Sergey and Larry joked about bringing a grown-up in when they brought in Eric Schmidt to run the company at the beginning of the century when they became a real company. Is Google, maybe Amazon, maybe Microsoft, are they the grown-ups? Are they more trustworthy on this front?
I'd characterize Google as the most capitalist of them all.
In a good or a bad way?
Both. Look, here's the question that needs to be answered. How can the benefits of capitalism end up producing a better society?
Or redistributing at least the wealth and power in a fairer way to everybody rather than just a tiny group of Silicon Valley billionaires.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also have a slight reaction against the word redistributing because it makes it feel like welfare.
Redirecting.
I would say leveraging.
Leveraging
the growth of wealth to benefit society as a whole, not through welfare, but through uplifting everything. What is that? And you know, for that to be answered, Altman is arguing for ownership, mass ownership of these companies. I don't think that really cuts it. I think it eventually it comes down to you know, an impossible problem, which is capturing the wealth that is privately owned for common good.
Yeah, at least you're not talking about your friend Elon's vision of the end of money.
Well, Elon honestly is closer to understanding this than anyone. He hasn't got a practical plan yet, but he at least can describe the processes that are going to happen.
Yeah, and I, as you know, and you and I have argued on this endlessly, I really loathe Elon Musk, but I think you're right on that front. I think that he has nothing to lose. He doesn't care what his marketing people tell him. I mean, Dario and Sam are probably still being pushed around by their marketing people or their strategic people. Musk says whatever he likes. And you're right in the sense that he addresses it directly.
Yeah.
And my interview of the week is with Eric Ries, a very influential writer. He's famous, of course, for his concept of the lean startup, which acquired a great deal of popularity in the 2010s, an iconic book. And
here's the book, Andrew.
You got the book. You're waving the book. Well, he has a new book out. It's called Incorruptible. And what seems to me, what was interesting about my conversation is clearly he's being pushed around by the zeitgeist. He's gone from fetishizing the lean startup to talking about how companies can be more mature and responsible. But I thought that the conversation with Ries, I mean, he doesn't speak on behalf of Silicon Valley. He lives in the North Bay. But he still sees morality coming from within companies. So his model of companies like Patagonia, moral companies, maybe Anthropic, we talked about that. Do you believe in that Ries model of the only way in which we're going to get a more moral capitalism is by corporations being more moral, Keith?
No, I'm pretty happy with corporations just being purely profit driven. Of course, there's limits to what you can do. The law governs that in pursuing profit. I'm more interested in what happens to the profit than I don't really want to, you know, it's like saying to a world champion boxer, you should punch more softly because he might hurt the other person. That doesn't make any sense.
So you don't want you don't want a capitalism dominated by Patagonia style companies?
It'd make me throw up, to be honest. I mean, I don't look to companies as being.
Would you throw up live for us?
If pushed hard enough, quite possibly. But you know, I don't look to companies to be moral guides. I look at I want them to be good companies. You know, when you invest in the stock market, you want them to be growing fast and making profit. That's it. There's nothing more to it. That's capital.
So Sundar, that's your message to Sundar. I shouldn't worry at all about morality. This is a $5 trillion company now.
I don't think it's the company's job. I do think Sundar personally should. I think individuals who care about the future absolutely should start making plans for societal good. But the job of their company is to produce wealth.
Okay, so we've established that. So where does the moral guidance come in? Come back. Maybe we'll end where we began with the Pope, Keith. I mean, it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much.
Okay, so we've done away with the Pope. We've done away with Sundar and Dario and Sam. Where does the moral guidance come from?
Honestly, you end up with having to discuss politics. Let's call it in sociological terms, the superstructure and civil society. Our politicians are massively disappointing.
So it comes from politicians.
No, it doesn't. That's the problem.
But it should do. Well, that's your point.
Yeah, and in the absence of that, what you get is populism, because the people care. The people care about the future, and if politicians can't be trusted, they end up, going elsewhere. There's a couple of articles already in next week's newsletter about liberal nationalism, one from Noah Smith. And I do think that populism is the unintended consequence of lack of leadership.
Okay, but that's another criticism. Where does it? You're dodging the question. Where does the moral guidance come from?
I think it probably comes from the populists.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So, was it a big news week, Keith? You began by saying it wasn't. I think you have to acknowledge it was a little bigger than you acknowledge.
Yes, I was wrong.
And can we credit Anthropic? Is this maybe you should slip one of those pieces into your newsletter to acknowledge that the news that Anthropic, this is my, you have to excuse me. I've had a bad year for football, so Anthropic's my new team. I've replaced Spurs with Anthropic. We have to at least acknowledge on this show that this is big news. Anthropic tops OpenAI. This is at least according to the New York Times. Tops OpenAI to become the world's most valuable AI startup. Keith says that's not really true, but it kind of is true. Yeah, and that's big news.
Look, I think our listeners need to understand what's happening here is every week I write an editorial and a title, and Andrew's job is to write an alternative editorial and title. And what he's just set up, I guarantee this is prediction, that when you look at the keen on version of this show and compare the top bullet points, it's going to be the opposite of mine.
Fake news, in other words. Well, Keith, as always, you're a good sport. Excellent conversation. We will talk again next week, where no doubt we will tussle over the moral credibility of your friend Dario Amodei. Have a good week, Keith, and we'll talk in a week's time.
Will do. Bye, everyone.